The 32-nation alliance of NATO celebrated their 75th anniversary of its founding today. And while in Brussels for the occasion, Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed that Ukraine will eventually be accepted as a member nation. Well, this comes as the country's war against Russian invasion continues, and as a result, the Biden administration continues to push for Congress to pass additional billions of dollars in military spending for their effort. Well, joining me with his thoughts on all of this, as well as a discussion on the hidden player behind this crisis and potentially other crises around the world, is Chang. He's a distinguished senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute, also the author of The Coming Collapse of China and China is Going to War. And by the way, you can follow him on X under the handle at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always great to have you.
Thanks so much, Jody.
Okay, let's begin with this. I'm intrigued by this whole issue of the Chinese role behind so many conflicts taking place around the world. And you've said that frankly, we need to recognize Chinese influence on countries, including countries like Russia and Iran. That China appears to be happy to sit back and let other countries conduct their wars by proxy. Explain what you mean by all of this.
Well, China is now fighting proxy wars on 3 continents. It greenlighted the invasion of Ukraine, and it's supporting Russia across the board, especially with lethal aid. In North Africa, China and Russia are fueling insurgencies that look like wars, and China is backing Iran. So with elevated commodity purchases, last year, China purchased 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. But also we see diplomatic and propaganda support for the effort against Israel. Plus, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi militia all have large quantities of Chinese weapons. So this is China going to war. Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, revered Mao Zedong. I think that Xi took 2 pages out of Mao's peasant movement playbook. And one of them was to create chaos around the world, because chaos, Mao Zedong felt, would lead to worldwide Chinese rule. So Xi Jinping is disrupting societies around the world, destroying them, because he believes that that will lead to his eventual control of all of humanity.
Wow. Well, none of us should be surprised that the mainstream media is, by and large, avoiding all that information. But this is information that people need to be aware of. I also wanted to get your thoughts today. Some of the remarks today made by Secretary of State Blinken, some are saying some of these remarks even sounded the alarm bells for a potential World War III. Do you agree? What are your thoughts on his comments?
Well, you can't admit somebody to NATO if it's already involved in a war. And as much as I believe in supporting the war against Russia, nonetheless, you can't do that while Ukraine is actually fighting, because that means that NATO would actually be fighting. We're not exactly clear of Blinken's timeline on this, on admission, but clearly the Biden administration failed. They failed with the catastrophic withdrawal of Afghanistan. And that led Vladimir Putin to think that he could invade Ukraine. Remember, Putin went after and took Crimea during Obama's administration. There was 4 years of peace while Trump was president. And then after Trump left office, you have Putin going against Ukraine again, this time for the rest of it that he didn't get in 2014. So really what we're having right now is perhaps the beginning of World War III. Remember, in the 1930s, there were separate wars that eventually merged into what we now call World War II. I think the same dynamic is at place today, because there is almost an irresistible momentum to global conflict.
Wow. Yeah, you're not the only one saying that. There's rumblings of that sentiment among many leaders that are out there talking today. You mentioned a while ago China's role even in Iran and also in Gaza. It's like they've got their fingerprints all over the place. But you mentioned their purchase of Iranian oil. Isn't that, in essence, them funding Hamas? I mean, isn't that part of what they're doing, do you think?
Absolutely. First of all, there's elevated commodity purchases in Russia, which supports the Russian war effort, and China got away with it, so it's doing the same thing with Iran. And here's another statistic on Chinese purchases of Iranian oil. Last year, China's purchases were 60% above that in 2017. 2017 is relevant, Jody, because that was the last year before the Trump administration reimposed sanctions on the purchase of Iranian oil. So you can see that this war would not have occurred. Iran could not have afforded to attack Israel were it not for China's backing of the Iranian regime. And also in 2021, there was that $400 billion 25-year announcement of a strategic partnership between Iran and China.
Well, that's a major point to bring up. While all of this is happening, I find it interesting that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen arrived today in China for some economic meetings. Number one, do you think that's a good idea? Number two, what's going to come of it? What kind of things are they going to be discussing?
Horrible idea, and nothing will come of it. Remember, Janet Yellen was in Beijing last July. And so the question the American people should be asking is, what can Janet Yellen say? What can she accomplish now that she couldn't say or accomplish, a half year ago? The problem here is that we talk to China, they delay while we have these discussions, and they ignore our warnings. And I think that Janet Yellen has just got to go and impose severe costs on China for predatory trade practices. That's what she's going there to talk about this time, especially the subsidies for China's green energy for their electric vehicles. Well, we know that China is engaged in all this. What can we say? So I think she just should start imposing costs. And we do that, then we might get somewhere. But this is not working at all.
Yeah, it looks like more a photo op than anything to make it appear that the administration is trying to do something. And it looks like the administration's trying to look as though they are trying to strike a balance, if you will, between economic competition and maybe antagonism. I don't think there'll be a whole lot of antagonism there. We seem pretty much paralyzed. But are they misguided? Do you think that even some sort of balance, whatever it is they're trying to bring forth, is even possible?
It's not possible. And so the administration is at least misguided. Clearly, the administration says these things that sound like they should work. Oh, we need to talk to China. Oh, we can do this and we can do that. The problem is, even though those things sound reasonable, we've been saying them now for more than 3 decades. And through 3 decades, China's behavior has deteriorated across the board, where now it is engaged in belligerent, provocative conduct, leading the world to war. And we've got to pivot. We have got to realize that our policies have just utterly failed. We issue these warnings, as I mentioned, and we don't follow up. That's what led to World War II in Europe, where Britain and France from 1936 on issued all of these warnings to Hitler. And Hitler, you get to August 1939 and Britain and France say, we're going to go to war if you invade Poland. We know from the archives, Jody, that nobody in Berlin believed London and Paris. Well, we are the British and French of this decade because we've issued 3 decades of warnings to China and failed to back them up.
Wow. Last question real quickly, and we've got about a minute only. We look at all the Chinese nationals who are now crossing the U.S. border illegally. The increase has been over 6,000% just since 2021. That year we had 342. Now we are already over 22,000 for this year. Are you concerned about that at all, real quickly?
Yeah, many of the migrants coming across look like they're soldiers or operatives. And that's what we have to be concerned about, that they're coming here to wage war on the U.S. They're doing things that are not consistent with desperate Chinese. They look like they're coming here to attack us. Remember that secret Chinese biological weapons lab in Reedley, California? Oh, yeah. I think that these migrants are going to take the mice from that lab and spread them around the U.S., creating a pandemic here.
Frightful. Gordon, Chang, thank you so much. Always great to have you on the program. We're deeply grateful for your insight.